All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate everyone taking the time and coming out. My name is Drew Ford. I'm the director on the data science team here at iProspect.
Hi, and I'm Doug O'Reilly. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Data and Insights Group at iProspect. And thank you all for coming here, first of all. I know it's after lunch. We'll try and get the energy level up with a very exciting data discussion right after lunch here. I know that's what everybody's looking forward to, right? So the title of our presentation is Getting It Right? And so this is this is really about your data and analytics investments and how we can make the most of those, right? Whether it's your existing teams or things that you're planning to do. And why is it so hard to get this right? I mean, as we've seen, in our conversations over the last couple of days, what's happening out there, it's very complex. There's a lot of changes that are constantly happening. Sam had his presentation where he was talking about going from 12 zettabytes to 42 zettabytes or whatever it was. I don't know what a zettabyte is either, so he's not alone in that. But it gets to a point where, that massive level of everything, it's meaningless in a lot of ways, right? What does that mean to any of us? I mean, really nothing. So how do we deal with this, right? Well, part of it, as we've talked about, over the course of the last day and a half, also is about this idea of brilliant basics and doing the basics just really well, right? But the question becomes then, what are the basics? What are those foundational things that we need to revisit and make sure that we're doing brilliantly as we go forward? And so we've looked across all of our clients, we've looked across our own network, we've talked with a lot of our peers. And we've really narrowed it down to a few things that seem to be markers of success, markers of analytics groups that seem to be doing it really well. So that's what we want to share with you here today.
And as Doug mentioned, it's really hard. So we've identified what we think are the 4 keys to overcoming and building a successful analytics organization. And the first is defining what success is. That means a large variety, wide, shape. It takes on different shapes and forms for everyone here. And also the length of it's different in terms of getting from 0 to 100 and what success looks like. So what we're going to take you through is, how are we going to start with defining what success is? Any good plan or any good journey starts with defining what the endpoint is. We're going to walk you through creating a cultural shift within your organization to get to that point of success. Walk you through how building a data foundation and data fluidity make you agile to get to that point of success. And then finally, how are we going to use all that data and start acting on it and feeding it back into our marketing campaigns.
So let's start with the first key, which is, again, defining success. Looking across all of our clients and across everything else, the common thread, the fundamental truth to the groups that seem to be doing this are they're very dynamic groups, they're agile groups, they're groups that have the ability to move and adapt and take advantage of opportunities as they come. And given the complexity and given the disruption in our space and as things move from 12 to 42 zettabytes again, or whatever those are, that you have an organization that has the capacity to scale with those as well. So this, we look at this and we define it around the idea of having dynamic capabilities. So to start, a successful organization is one that's going to be built to get to an area where they have this agility in terms of execution.
And as Doug mentioned, it's getting a lot more difficult. And one of the foundational reasons why it's getting more difficult is because data is becoming larger and larger. Really interesting infographic here around some key statistics that we see with the big data, but some to call out. So Google has 3.8 million searches per minute of every single day. The one that I probably contribute the most to is Netflix has 97,000 video streams per minute of every day. Hopefully, as Jeremy said yesterday, 1 in 3 people is on Netflix. Hopefully no one in this room is doing that. But anyways, so there's lots of data. We're collecting more and more data. It's becoming increasingly complex because of all of this data we're collecting. Things are constantly changing. The connectivity between the data platforms are always changing. There's also new data partners entering the fold that are disrupting the space and adding new data sets into it. So it's becoming an increasingly complex thing. We see, for instance, with our partners, their data is staying the same, but we see their algorithms changing on almost a daily basis, or what we can track is changing on a daily basis. So we have to create a dynamic analytics organization to meet that change and meet that complexity.
And that last point in terms of disruption is especially important. few of the folks in the room yesterday were at lunch and we were actually talking about the classic case of the company that didn't handle disruption properly, and that was Kodak, right? And the crux of our conversation in a lot of ways was not that Kodak didn't see what was happening, it was their inability to respond, right? It was that they didn't have an agile organization. They were too rigid in the things that they were doing, and they couldn't think outside of that space. And if we're looking at everything going forward, how data, how those algorithms, how the platforms, how engagement models, new channels even developing over the next few years, none of us are going to be able to predict that accurately, but we can plan to be agile enough, to deal with those challenges as they arise. And so, if we look at dynamic capabilities as sort of the definition of success, we also looked at what are the commonalities in terms of the factors of the companies and the groups and our clients and ourselves where we've had situations where we've been able to deliver on that. And we see that dynamic capability as a factor of 5 things. The first of all, ground table stakes, technical skill set. You have to have it, obviously. You have to be a good data scientist. You have to have your analytics skill set down. And then bandwidth, obviously. You have to have enough people to be able to execute what you need. But you can't just keep throwing people at a problem, right? That's not scalable. That's not a solution. So while those are foundational, the differentiating points are the other 3 where we are, when you're asked, how can we do more with what we already have? How can we learn from the successes we're having? Investments in making the most of those investments really fall into 3 areas. And these aren't, monetary investments. These aren't out-of-pocket investments. This is investments, first of all, in our people from an interpersonal skill set, asking the analysts to do a better job, from a people perspective. The second is process, really. It's about the strategies for creating data fluidity and understanding the full end-to-end role of data within the marketing ecosystem. And then finally, a little bit of technology in that equation as well. How to use some of the emerging technologies to speed to solution.
So the first point is around creating a cultural shift within your organization, specifically within your analytics organization. And the key point we want to pull out here is how we're going to shift the analysts to be more personal. Create those soft skills, that soft skills culture among the analysts. So everyone has seen this this headline probably plaguing their LinkedIn news feeds over the past 5 years around creating a data-driven marketing culture. And I mean, it makes sense, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but what I'd like to caution everyone here on is if we're taking we're taking our marketing people and we're asking them to be analysts, we're asking them to get into the data weeds on a day-to-day basis, it really isn't freeing up their time to do those high-level tasks, right? It's not freeing up their time to do creative and strategic things. So what we're focusing on at iProspect is creating a marketing-driven data culture. And what that really means is it means we're taking our analytics team and we're embedding them back into the marketing teams, embedding them back into the day-to-day channel teams and the client teams. And what that allows them to do is it allows them to understand the different nuances between that are going on within their data from the campaigns. And that's critical to the insights that they're pulling out on a daily basis. Additionally, I think it just makes sense from a logical and like an economical standpoint, right? So there's probably 10 to 20 marketers on average to every single analyst within an organization. So if we're wanting to take all of those marketers and train them on data, that's going to be a huge shift. But if we're going to take these analysts instead and train them on the marketing and give them that domain knowledge, it seems like a much more easy and less rigid path to go down.
So what we're really asking here is to make the shift incumbent upon the analytics team, right? Ask them to find a way to be marketers first as they're framing problems and solutions, right? And so that has a few implications. First of all, finding the right talent to do so. Now this isn't for every analyst, but again, sort of the leads and the main points of contacts within your group have to have the skill set. They have to be able to step outside of their role as analysts and understand what's going on in the marketing organization, what your day-to-day needs are, your pain points, both from a tactical implementation standpoint all the way up to strategically where you need to go. Secondly, identifying strategies to embed the analysts within the working group. This is really about getting them to work more collaboratively across the organization. We've heard over the last day and a half the importance of data probably, at least 4 or 5 dozen times across all of the conversations. And I'm going to ask on the client side, is there anybody here who actually, fulfills a role or their primary responsibility is as a data scientist or a marketing analyst? You are our first one. Come on up. I've been asking in the other ones, like, what did you do with my people? And there she is. Right. So, but thank you for coming. Right. But this is, but the point of this is, I've been learning a ton over the last day and a half. I mean, just learning about, how much creative sucks, right? Yesterday, among many other things. But a lot of great learning, and a lot of it really, for all of us, we're here to learn and grow and get these new perspectives in. The analysts need those as well, because they need to understand where your thinking is headed and the things that are impacting you from a day-to-day basis as well.
And these strategies don't even have to be very complex. For us, it comes down to something as simple as seating charts within offices, right? I really hate the idea of my analytics team just sitting in the corner by themselves doing analytics in a box all day. So we seat them with the actual client teams and the channel teams so they can be there and getting those data nuances on a regular basis.
And the last point is around the training that we give them. We work very hard to, make sure they're trained on the latest platforms and the latest technologies and things of that. But from the soft side, we've had a lot of success, and we've seen a lot of success where analytics groups and teams have been taken out and asked to, participate in design thinking processes. So, the learning there, the very first part of a design thinking process is the empathy stage, right? And that's how do you step out of your own zone and understand that the problems you're trying to solve are usually somebody else's problems, and you can't understand what those problems are unless you, walk a mile in their shoes, right? And that takes, some learning for everybody. Quite frankly, and sometimes it's particularly hard within the analytics space, but to give people that training and to get them to step outside of there really can help broaden their skill set. And also, we were talking about inclusion yesterday, right? It really helps them understand how to take different voices and understand the problems and the situations that people who are unlike themselves are dealing with as they're trying to create their solutions.
So we have a really cool example of how we at iProspect injected this design thinking back into an analytics project, and we saw better results from it. So the name of the project was Oculi, and version 1 we developed. The process was we got a bunch of our analysts in a room with a bunch of Google engineers, and we wanted to develop a use case around a specific piece of Google machine learning technology called their Vision API. So what their Vision API does is it takes an image and it decomposes that image down into its metadata. So think of things like the color composition within the image, or the text within the image, or objects or logos within the image. So Google built a pipeline between our creative assets and this Vision API and ran our creatives through it. And you can imagine, we'd look at things like, does the word sale perform better than the word 25% off within an image in terms of click-through rate or conversion rate? But unfortunately, we saw very limited adoption with this tool once we first built it with Google. And the reason why is because we weren't actually considering the needs of our creative teams or our social teams or our content teams. So we went back to the drawing board, we sat down with them and we asked them, what does your creative process actually look like? So after that sit down, we then went and developed a new tool where instead of looking at our creative images, we were scraping images from our core audience on Instagram and Reddit. And again, we ran it through the same piece of machine learning technology to get the metadata on it. And we compared it to data like the performance data of it, like likes and shares on Instagram. But effectively what that did is it completely widened the scope for our creative team. So it didn't just give us learnings on our specific creative that we were already running, but it gave us learnings on our core audience and what image attributes are important to that audience to get them to engage with that piece of creative. So ultimately we were able to feed those insights back into how they built the creative. They built new creative, and we saw, I think, around a 5% increase in the click-through rate, as well as we were able to feed the insights back into the SEO team so that they can inform landing page optimization.
And that was really critical, right? Which was getting to an understanding of what the actual real needs of those teams were. They needed more insights about who our customer was and what, getting closer to that customer and finding some areas outside of where we traditionally were for new opportunities for creative and content development. So once we understood that that's where the needs were, we were able to shift and actually deliver the proper solution. So aligning analysts around a common sense of purpose that's defined in terms of those strategic needs and done collaboratively is really the key to success within this particular space. And that becomes important in the next stage. All right, so we're talking about data fluidity, which is really understanding the role of data, again, across that full marketing ecosystem from end to end. Well, that means understanding it at every single touch point. That means understanding across every single channel. We're talking about the complexity of the journey, and there is no single journey, and it has millions of permutations. So understanding all those permutations and the role of data, both from a creation and a collection and an understanding aspect, is crucially important. And it's usually the analytics team from a data strategy standpoint that gets asked to provide the solution here, right? So if they're not going and looking at all these things and understanding the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, they're gonna deliver a suboptimal solution.
So creating a fluid data infrastructure really begins with defining a data strategy first. And I've called out 3 different points here around how we should think more higher level about creating that data strategy. And the first is around collecting the right data based off of your business use cases and not just big data. So we all know that the kitchen sink approach doesn't work. We can't just turn the faucet on, collect as much data as we possibly can and hope that some of it sticks and it meets our business use cases. The second point is around embedding your analysts back into the organization. So they're not just model jockeys developing their models over in the corner, but they're actually sitting with your channel teams and they understand the nuances from your campaigns and they're using that to inform the data strategy. And the final piece is around activation. It's great if we build this huge data infrastructure, but if we're not actually feeding that back into our optimization and insights process, then it's a little bit all for naught. So creating a comprehensive data strategy, we've outlined a roadmap for how we've seen success in the past. And the first piece is around defining what we want the data strategy to do. And that key to that is your business objective. So starting and looking at, are we trying to drive awareness or performance or consideration, and outlining those business objectives and your strategy and the tactics that you're running within them and the KPIs that we're going to use from a media standpoint to meet those business objectives. And then from there, we can start looking at what data is available, what data are we already collecting, where are our gaps, and how can we fill in those gaps with other data pieces that we want to bring in. And we need to consider our MarTech infrastructure there. Can the platforms talk to each other, and can we pull that into our data lake? So once we have a definition, we really move into the design and development phase. And this all sort of lives within maybe like an audit that we would do with you guys at the beginning of an engagement, where we're sitting down, we're defining your business objectives, and we're defining the data that you have and the data you don't have. So aligning on those business objectives, really the way it manifests itself is in terms of a measurement framework. So looking at our marketing KPIs and how we ladder those back into your business objectives. We're also integrating the data back into our platform. We're making sure the data that we're capturing is all correct, the taxonomy on it's rigorous, we're wrangling the data, we're cleaning the data. So it's in a nice place where an analyst can just start using it immediately. We're embedding ourselves back into the channel teams in the forms of dashboards and reports. So again, we're defining the end use cases, and we're making sure that the reports actually meet the end user's needs. And then finally, we're becoming an extension of the media teams as well as your internal teams. So we're ensuring that we're using all of this data to optimize, and this comes in the two different forms. One, it's strategic, like we're pulling out these insights and we're making more macro level recommendations to your campaigns. And then the second piece is we're developing auto optimization, like machine learning types of models that we can use to inform campaign optimizations in real time. So I want to walk you through a toy example. I admittedly kind of made it up a little bit, but I think it's a really good example of that illustrates the point of how the data collection process and the data strategy is really important to informing the optimizations and the recommendations that are coming out and making them accurate. So I'm sure you guys have all thought of diminishing returns. Like, it's important to us, it's important to you guys as clients, as well as I'm sure your finance teams. They want to know, where's that point of optimal spend? And the way we go about building these models is looking at spend over time and fitting response curves to the data. So looking at the variations in spend and where do we see the maximum amount of revenue come from our spend, or essentially the peak within the data. But within this example, it's actually a really good model up top, but say we didn't do our due diligence and we didn't actually account for all the business's use cases. So say this is a retail client and they're heavily promotional. So the response that we see from spend varies from season to season based off of the different promotions or discounts that they might be running at the time. So without accounting for that single variable within the model, what we're actually doing is overestimating the value of our marketing spend. So just including that one variable, it actually flattens out the response curve we see, which in turn does two things. One, it lowers the expected return at our spend, or it lowers down the forecast that we would expect for our spend. But more importantly, it actually pushes back the recommended spend, average weekly spend from the model. So it changes the recommendation that the model has. So instead of recommending a $95,000 on average per week spend, it pushes it back $10,000 to $85,000. And anyone doing the quick math in the room, that's $500,000 per year, right? So it's a real material impact, and that's just from omitting one single variable from one model.
And it's not actually even the omission of the variable, it's how we treat it, right? The data was there, but we didn't treat it as promotional data and separate it out and treat it somewhat differently. And so when you're not close to what's happening on the ground from a marketing perspective and you don't have that context for how to look at the data properly, obviously mistakes can get made. So again, it needs to be incumbent upon the analytics team to build that collaboration so they understand what's going on all times and we keep close to what's actually happening. So in terms of creating data fluidity, it's all about mapping the flow and role of data. The role piece is extremely important, understanding where it's coming from, what it's supposed to be doing. And so defining that from definition to collection to transformation to utilization, if we can get that right, if we get the first part right with the right people asking the right questions, get the right strategy, then we can start doing the really cool stuff. And this really comes down to looking at speed to solution. There's a lot of emerging technology out here, and the barriers to doing analytics and doing it quickly and more accurately are really coming down. And why is that happening? It's happening because the skill sets that are out there, especially from a data science and advanced analytics perspective, are being codified. People are taking the learnings that we've had and they create recipes, right, that we can put into open source libraries. If we look at just the last 6 months alone, see a huge surge in Python libraries, which data scientists use to download and start testing out new automated machine learning and automated artificial intelligence platforms to help create solutions. And we're seeing this on the commercial side too, a lot of investment in a lot of different platforms. And so we've been working across all these libraries and all of these platforms to test them out, learn their capabilities, because they all don't do the same thing. So again, that goes back to the right tool for the right problem.
Yeah, so Doug's asked me to do a proof of concept on a few of those platforms, and it feels a little bit like training my robot to take over my job. But they've been really cool because we've been able to develop 400 models in the course of 10 days, 400 machine learning models, and that's very fast. That's wicked fast, and that number of models is astronomical. Whereas creating a single machine learning model used to take months, these platforms are making it very, very easy to do it in a very short amount of time.
But it's Drew's soft skills that will keep him employed. But taking that, if we have those first two ingredients set, then we can leverage the embedded teams and we can leverage the data fluidity we created to actually apply these things and apply them effectively. So when it all comes together, if we get the foundational pieces right, with the right people and we have the right bandwidth, if we can combine it with these three differentiating factors where we've seen a lot of success to speed everything up, that really gets us to a place where we see some transformational change and opportunities in the future. So, thank you very much.